For the first time in history, according to the U.S. Social Security records, the name Micah has cracked the top 100 baby names. Now, Micah may not be a Noah or James or Elijah, but if we type in the name Micah, we see that it has solidly been within the top 100 baby names for the last 3 years. However, I doubt that most parents who chose this name realize that that name, Micah, was originally used as a battle cry. I mean, can you imagine an ancient army charging onto the battlefield shouting, Micah! The name Micah was originally used in the Bible as a battle cry, and we'll learn more about that in a minute. But of course, Micah was later a 7th century prophet in Judah. Now, he was a prophet who was known for announcing the birthplace of the Messiah in Bethlehem, and not much else. But what is the rest of the book of Micah about? Well, it turns out that the meaning of Micah's battle cry name holds the secret to one of the most surprising, happy ending reversals in the entire Bible. I got it all laid out for you here in this chart. Now, if you're studying the book of Micah personally, or you're teaching it in a small group or a sermon series, you can download this chart for free in the description below, and then hit subscribe, and we can dive into the backstory behind this prophet with a top 100 name. Micah 1:1. The word of the Lord came to Micah in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Now that means that Micah was likely a contemporary of the prophet Isaiah, who also ministered to Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, but Isaiah was probably a little bit older than Micah because Isaiah also ministered to Uzziah. Now, when Micah came onto the scene, both Israel and Judah were on the tail end of a lengthy golden age. This golden age of prosperity was experienced during the reigns of Uzziah and Jeroboam. But all this was about to change when the sleeping giant of Assyria woke up in 745 when Tiglath-Pileser III took the throne. Now, when he did, at the beginning of his reign, the kingdom of Assyria was this orange blob here, but at the end of his reign, his kingdom had expanded to cover all the territory colored here in green and encroached closer and closer to Israel and Judah. 23 years after Tiglath's ascent to the throne, he's going to expand his empire and wipe Israel off the map in 722. And then 20 years after that, in 701, he is going to completely decimate Judah as well. And this is going to be an attack that Judah barely survives. Do you remember the story of Hezekiah? How he is surrounded by the Assyrian army, and then he takes the written threat of destruction into the temple of God, and there he prays. And the city of Jerusalem is miraculously delivered when God sends out his angel and destroys 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. We're told of Isaiah's participation in this event in 2 Kings 18 and 19. But 100 years later, Jeremiah, he is going to tell us of Micah's involvement as well. So let's jump to Jeremiah 26. Now, poor Jeremiah, the guy was not very popular. It seemed like everyone was out to kill the guy. Look in verse 11. Priests, prophets, officials of all the people said, "This man deserves the sentence of death," Jeremiah, because he prophesies against this city. However, there were some important exceptions to this rule of his unpopularity. Take a look at verse 16. There were some other officials who said, "This man, Jeremiah, does not deserve the sentence of death, for he's spoken in the name of the Lord." And then he reminds them of Micah of Moresheth, who prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, saying, "Zion will be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins." Now this verse is a direct quote of Micah 3, verse 12. Zion will be plowed as a field, Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins. Now Micah, he warned Hezekiah of this coming destruction on Jerusalem, just like Jeremiah warned Jehoiakim and Zedekiah. Now we know how these guys responded to Jeremiah's warning. Well, how did Hezekiah respond to Micah's warning? Well, Jeremiah reminds us, again, back in Jeremiah 26, where the officials say, did Hezekiah, king of Judah, put Micah to death? No, Hezekiah feared the Lord. Hezekiah entreated favor from the Lord, and the Lord relented of the disaster that he had pronounced against that city. Now, this coming destruction on Jerusalem for her sins of idolatry and especially injustice, this was Micah's message. 3 times he's going to shout out here in chapter 1, "Hear, you peoples, all of you." And then again in chapter 3, "Hear, you heads of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel." One more time in chapter 6, "Hear what the Lord says." Now, what do you think this word is in Hebrew? Hear. Well, it is the word Shema, and these 3 statements that I've highlighted in green form the book's primary literary divisions. There are 3 sections in the book of Micah, chapters 1 and 2, then 3 to 5, and finally 6 to 7. And each one of these 3 sections is going to begin with this Shema statement, this oracle of announcement, where Micah says, "Hear the coming judgment. Hear the warning of the Lord that I pronounce against you, O Judah." However, Micah's message is not all judgment. Each of these 3 divisions is going to begin with condemnation, but it's going to end with hope. Hope for a restoration after that judgment. And this is the real beauty of the book of Micah. This is what makes it so beautiful and so intricate. Each of these 3 sections has a direct and logical link between the content of that condemnation and the substance of the restoration which follows afterwards. There's a relationship between the nature of the judgment and the nature of the restoration following afterwards. The book opens with a terrifying vision of Yahweh coming down. In verse 3, "The Lord is coming out of his place. He will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. And when he does, the mountains will melt under him and the valleys will split open like wax before the fire." He's coming down in judgment, and specifically judgment against Samaria. Now, Samaria, that's the capital of the northern kingdom. And God is coming in judgment against her for her idolatry, her carved images, her idols that he says, "I will lay to waste." Now, Micah, he is pretty shook up about this. We read that Samaria will be made a heap. This happens in 722. And Micah, he says that for this I lament and I wail, I go stripped and naked, I make lamentation and mourning like the ostriches. Now, we're told why Micah goes to these great lengths of lamentation in the next verse, in verse 9. Is Micah really concerned about Samaria? I don't know that he is. Look at verse 9. "Her wound," that is the wound of Samaria, "has come to Judah." It has come south from Israel, now down to Judah. It has reached the gate of my people, Jerusalem. In verse 12, "The disaster has come down from Samaria to the gate of Jerusalem." And Micah sees in the future that Jerusalem, Zion, the people of Judah will go into exile. But here's the beauty of Micah. That judgment is going to be overturned in the very next section. So in chapter 1, Judah is going to be taken into exile. We're promised that they will in the future. But in chapter 2, they will be regathered. They will be assembled back to the land. And who's going to be the one who will do that? Who will bring Judah back? Well, chapter 2, after they're exiled in chapter 1, chapter 2, verse 12, Yahweh says, I will assemble all of you. I will gather the remnant of Israel, and I will set them together like sheep in a fold. Now, what does that make Yahweh? Yahweh is Israel and Judah's shepherd. He is their shepherd, you may even say good shepherd, and he is their king. But where is this sheepfold, this pasture to which the good shepherd promises to return his exiled sheep? Well, of course, it is the city of Jerusalem. But last we heard here in chapter 3, we're now in our second judgment restoration reversal, Zion will be made a heap of ruins. In chapter 3, just like Samaria was promised to be a heap of ruins in chapter 1. Well, Zion will be made a heap because of the injustice of its rulers, of its prophets, of its leaders who eat the flesh of their people. It will, we already read this in chapter 3, be plowed as a field, become a heap of ruins and a wooded height. But Micah promises that Zion, which will die in chapter 3, will be resurrected in chapter 4. Again, the very next section. Pay attention to these blue highlights referring to the city of Jerusalem. What will happen to the city? Well, it will be made the world capital, where all nations, all peoples will flow to the city of Jerusalem. They will say, "Come, let us go out up to the mountain of the house of the Lord, because we want to walk in his paths. We want him to teach us his ways." And the law will go forth from Zion to these nations. As a matter of fact, the king who rules on his throne in Jerusalem, he will decide disputes and judge between the nations. This is just like those two prostitutes who came before Solomon in Jerusalem, and he decided between their dispute. And as a result of this mediation of the king of Jerusalem between the nations, well, they will beat their sword into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. There will be peace among the whole world, and everyone will enjoy prosperity. This is an amazing promise of restoration following after destruction. But it is this final judgment, restoration, reversal which contains the significance of the name Micah. Here in chapters 6, 7, and 8, again, Micah is going to lament. Now for the second time, he will say, "Woe is me," here in chapter 7, just like he lamented in chapter 1. "Woe is me, because the godly have perished. He has searched the streets of Jerusalem, looking for one righteous person, and he has found no one." Micah, to this point in his book, he has wept for the city of Jerusalem. He has warned her, and now all that there's left to do is to pray. "As for me," he says, here in chapter 7, after his lament, verse 7, Micah says in the first person, which is quite interesting, "As for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation, and my God, he will hear me." In the very next verse, Lady Zion is going to speak with the same faith as Micah. She will say, "Rejoice not over me, O my enemy, for when I fall, I will rise. I will rise, and the remnant will return." They will return to Jerusalem from Assyria, from Egypt, from sea, and from mountain. And the boundary of Israel will be far extended. Her walls will be rebuilt, and her people will dwell in the midst of a garden land. They will be brought back to the Garden of Eden. But why? What reason do they have for such faith? Hasn't Jerusalem become a city of blood, a city which is emptied of all righteousness and filled only with those who detest justice? What reason do they have for such faith? Because the sinner can always stand confidently before Yahweh because of who he is. And the question, who is Yahweh, is both asked and answered in the final verses of this book. Micah 7:18, "Who is a God like you?" Now this line in Hebrew reads, Me-kah, or "Who is a God like you?" Now Micah, he will end his entire book with a question which is posed by his very own name, the name of Micah. Do you see it? Me-kah. Do you see how there's a relationship between his name and this final question? Me-kah, or "Who is like? Who is a God like you?" The Israelites first asked this question, or shouted it as a battle cry, after God's victory over Egypt at the Red Sea. Here in Exodus 15, they sing, "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and the rider he has thrown into the sea. You, O Yahweh, you blew with your wind, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead into the mighty waters." And here's the question, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, and doing wonders? Who is like you, Me-kah, Me-kah? But this battle cry is reworked at the end of Micah, and Yahweh is marveled at, not for his wonder-working power, but for his gracious pardoning of their iniquities. He is a God who passes over their transgressions, who takes all of their sins and casts them into the depths of the sea. What other God is there who delights in steadfast love and faithfulness? There is no God like our God. Because of his character, Yahweh will forgive. And because of his promise, Yahweh will be faithful to Abraham and to Jacob, to the nation of Israel, through whom God's richest blessings will flow to all the nations of the earth. Another prophet which inseparably links judgment and restoration is the prophet Zephaniah. And if you want to see how this prophet extends the kingdom promise beyond Israel to all nations, well, then you should check out this next video.